Okay, the background of the book or the whole project was more or less that we are a bit overwhelmed by a big, vast literature that's telling us how important agglomeration, so the concentration of people and firms in space, is for our competitiveness. And I just show a number of books that have been published on this issue recently, and it's really, there's one big message telling us that bigger cities do better. And it's also part of the policy frameworks advocated by, for instance, the OECD or the World Bank, DG Regio. So it's very powerful message that is coming to us. Actually, there were also Dutch cities involved in the project. So the cities of Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague, and Utrecht. And well, when we had those four together, of course, Eindhoven wanted to join, and Groningen also, because they want to be kind of not the four big cities, but the 6 big cities in the Netherlands. But of course, it was really nice that they joined. And they are a bit afraid, okay, if this agglomeration is so important for our competitiveness, well, we are really small, right, compared to other international metropolitan areas, and how can we survive this competition if we don't have these agglomeration economies to the same extent as our competitors? So the first part of the book, of the project, was that we actually explored who are your competitors. Actually, I was not that much involved in that part, but we were looking for revealed competition rather than, well, expected competition. All these cities tend to benchmark themselves with other cities. They just take a list. They don't really know whether these are real competitors or not. So what we did in the first part of the book was to develop a new method to identify competitors, and it basically works like this. So in terms of trade, if you're trading with the same region as this other region, then this will be your competitor. Right? That's how it works. And you can do the same for knowledge. Let's say we all want to cooperate with MIT or something like that. You can look at which universities MIT is cooperating with, and these are more or less your competitors. That's the whole idea behind this identification of the real competitors. I just show some results. For instance, financial service, the book is in Dutch, so I took some pictures and they are necessarily in Dutch too, but I'll explain. Financial services in Amsterdam, well, these are the main competitors. Well, it's Luxembourg, it's Ireland, Brussels, well, a German region close to Dortmund, Stuttgart. Actually, it's not so important, just to show what we did. Groningen was really interested in energy. They think that's their main business over there. And well, if you look for energy, the revealed competition comes from Antwerp and West London. I don't even know where it is. Probably in Norway and Denmark, some regions. But it was all. What is listed here are the main is how they compare to their competitors, to these 10 competitors over here. And there are a number of factors that determine competitiveness are listed here. And for instance, bevolkingsomvang, it simply means the size of the population. What you see is that compared to the main competitors, the region of Groningen and Assen in this case, really has much less critical mass than competing regions. So you could say they have less agglomeration economies. Actually, the same holds for Amsterdam. Compared to the real competitors, they are a bit smaller. We can continue with Eindhoven, of course, very important as a technology innovative hub in Europe. Also, Eindhoven, actually, if you're above or past this line, you're doing better than your competitors. But in terms of size of the population, Eindhoven is smaller. So, really, in comparison to the competitors, they have cannot perform so well in terms of agglomeration economies. That's the idea. Utrecht, similar story. I'm not going to repeat it. So There's a tendency in the Netherlands, or the typical government response from local governments is, okay, we should be a little bit bigger, right? That's the way how we can organize the agglomeration benefits. For instance, also, this is the mayor of Eindhoven, Rob van Gijzel. Eindhoven has 200,000 people, but he said, his policy is to increase the number as soon as possible to grow. And he said, well, we can add 50% more. Actually, this touches upon what I think is a very critical planning debate in the Netherlands that has been here for decades already. So what is the best way to organize these benefits for agglomeration? How does it relate to the urban system? So the typical response, also by these mayors, is that, okay, we should try to grow bigger, and then we have more agglomeration economies. For instance, also in Amsterdam, I'm not sure whether you know Zef Hemel, but he is a professor in urban and regional planning in Amsterdam, and he's constantly telling, okay, Amsterdam should grow, probably at the expense of other cities, but if we then have a real big metropolitan area in the Netherlands, so the Amsterdam metropolitan area, we will be much more competitive. The other alternative strategy that is being proposed, and that seems to be get a bit more support, especially by all the other cities outside of Amsterdam, is the whole story of as a network of cities we can do much better and we can borrow size from each other, and that's a kind of two opposing spatial strategies. And the book actually tries to contribute to this debate by especially exploring the second option. How can we borrow size in networks of cities? Some theory. We wondered how important is agglomeration's population size now really. Maybe in the past it was more important than it is today. And for instance, in economics, there's this new idea that networks can substitute for proximity, so you don't necessarily have to be very big as a city. If you're very well embedded in all kinds of networks, you could perhaps compensate your lack of critical mass. Other research has shown that cities that are very well connected, have a very strong position in all these international networks, they are performing better. For instance, in GOG, globalization and world cities literature, this is a very dominant idea. And some say, well, these networks can be even more important than local factors, and size is a local factor, of course. Others say, well, probably not. So there's no, it's a very small, minor theoretical debate so far. Not a lot of people have been contributing to it. Let's make it 4 hours. We should be ready.
No, try to be brief.
Probably run out of oxygen at any time. So, okay. So actually, what we wanted to explore, okay, how important are these networks in comparison to agglomeration benefits, in comparison to size, I should say. So we just looked at a lot of European cities, in fact, all European cities more or less. Looked at their size, looked at how well they are embedded in all kinds of networks, and then tried to determine how this influences performance. Now I'm a bit lazy. I took this all from a presentation I gave at the AHU Chicago last week, so I'm not going to tell all the same detail I presented there, but we have a big database on metropolitan functions, and I think it's important for you to remember metropolitan function is our performance indicator. It's an indicator, proxy for the presence of agglomeration benefits. For instance, the more theaters you have, that's a sign of agglomeration benefits, right? Galleries, it's about sports, it's about also more scientific functions, whether you host headquarters of big multinationals, these kind of issues are included in the database. Of course, size is very much related to the presence of all these kind of metropolitan functions. But what we wanted to look, okay, we do this analysis again, how important is size, how important is regional network embeddedness, and how important is international network embeddedness. And actually it's more, we measured this to a kind of population potential indicator. Of course, the nice things of doing this kind of quantitative analysis is that you can control for a number of other variables that might influence this as well. So, well, just the usual suspects, I guess, that we're controlled for. So we looked at how well a city is better regionally, so that's the number of people you can reach outside of your own city within 45 minutes. And the other one, the international connectivity, is more or less similar idea, how many people you can reach by land, air, sea, within 6 hours, and it was weighted according to the time it takes to get there. So what you see is that this is not, the international network connectivity is not spread very evenly over Europe. There are a number of places that are much better embedded in these networks than others. We had a guy from Erasmus University who does econometrics, so he had a very brilliant, very innovative, in fact, new type of regression model, 0 and 1 inflated beta regression. Remember the name, I would say. But what came out was that size was very much important, international networks were important, but regional, being very well connected on the regional scale, was not important, did not influence performance. Actually, we are, of course, interested in how important are networks in comparison to size. Right? What we found was that, well, if you would keep everything constant and you had a city of 34,000, 25th percentile, if you would shift it to the 75th, so that would be a city of 112,000 people, you would increase your number of metropolitan functions by this number. And we did the same for international network embeddedness, and then it would increase by this number. So our estimate of how important size is in comparison to networks is that on average it's about 2.5 times more important than networks. We thought it was nice to be able to put a figure on that. I think that means that actually networks are really quite important, right? If it's just 2.5 times, if size is just 2.5 times more important. But we looked at, that was for the total aggregate of metropolitan functions. If you look at individual metropolitan functions, for instance, the headquarters of big firms, size is important. It's, you see positive signs everywhere. But being in a place that is very well connected is much more important, right? So if Amsterdam wants to play a bigger role in, for instance, the financial services sector, with banks and advanced producer services, headquarters of financial firms, it's not really necessary to grow. Well, that helps a little. It's much more important that all these firms have a very strong position, all these international networks of firms. So that's a pretty new message, right? You don't necessarily need to grow. As a small city, you can be competitive as well, as long as you're very well positioned in all kinds of networks. Now I have some very difficult to understand pictures, but they tell a very important story, so I want to show them anyway. So in general, you could say, well, network or size is 2.5 times more important than networks, but this balance differs for different sizes of cities. So this shows the positive effect of an increase in population, yeah. So the population of the city itself on the presence of agglomeration benefits, proxied by metropolitan function. Yeah? So if you're a small city, so this is 500,000, this is 1 million. An increase of your population in a small city is very essential to increase the number of, or your level of agglomeration benefits you provide, right? But for larger cities, let's say above 500,000, a further increase of population is only marginal. Yeah? You get it so far? This is the position of an increase of the international network position of your city. You see, it's positive for all cities, also small ones, but it's more positive for larger ones. So again, that tells us that Now, if you're a large city and you want to have more agglomeration economies, you better invest in networks because it's more important than an increase in population. So, this is a regional network embeddedness. You see this red line indicates that actually you can also, now let's first say, the better you are embedded in regional networks, so networks with neighboring cities, etc., that's positive as long as you're a large city yourself. So larger cities profit from it. If you're smaller, being very well connected to larger neighboring cities might mean that the life is sucked out of you in a way by the larger cities. You will perform less well, right? You lose. You can't beat the competition from your larger neighbors. That's the story. Actually, quite a substantial part of the book then is dedicated to exploring this idea of regional networks. So how does it really work? And so we know that larger cities may cast what we call an agglomeration shadow over nearby smaller ones. But we wondered, okay, what if maybe this is mediated through the strength of the integration between the cities? Maybe that only occurs when the cities are not that strongly connected or integrated. And maybe it's positive for both, also for smaller cities when they get more strongly integrated with their larger neighbors. And we had a special analysis on polycentric metapods. And really, if you know my work a little bit, that's my favorite hobby. And we just wondered, okay, if, for instance, the Randstad is strongly integrated, does it perform better as a whole than if it was more loosely connected, all the cities together? Okay. ESPON, you're familiar with that program, I guess. It's a big European program that sponsors research into planning issues in Europe. Actually, I think a new call was announced today or tomorrow. We have to check it because it gives us opportunities. But it has a number of classifications that indicate, well, that you can translate into, in my view, an indicator of how strongly integrated cities are. So they are very strongly integrated if they are part of the same functional urban area, FUA. So that's more or less the same labor market. So perhaps Delft is in the same labor market as The Hague, so Delft and The Hague are strongly integrated. You can be moderately integrated if you're part of, forgive me the term, a poly-FUA. Then the labor basins of different cities touch each other but are not really integrated. And there's a third indicator, in ESPON, for all European cities, they have delimited so-called push areas, potential urban strategic horizons, that's what it is. Actually, that's the area within 45 minutes of travel time from the city, right? And if these areas overlap to a certain extent, they have been termed potential integration areas in Europe. But of course, you understand that the level of integration between cities that are part of the same potential integration area is not so strong, it's weak. And we combined this with the average score of how a city is doing. And how a city is doing was measured as the extent to which it's able to exploit its own size. So as I showed you this diagram, there's a very strong correlation relation between size and the level of metropolitan functions present. So if you have more functions, you would score than you would expect, given your size, you would score a positive value. If you have less functions than you would expect, given your size, you would score a negative value. I think what is the main message I want to tell here is that the stronger connected, if you compare cities that have only strong connections with cities that have only weak connections, for instance, that are located here. So if you compare these cities with these cities, they will perform much better. So that's a sign that stronger integration between neighboring cities, in fact, is positive. Also, some cities have both these relations and these relations, and they do better than cities that have weak relations and moderate relations. That's what's considered. Actually, the best is cities that have many relations, that have strong, that have intermediate and weak relations as well. So, again, that tells the story. Networks, integration are extremely important for the performance of cities. Okay, the final chapter in the book is about these. This in fact kind of hypothesis, and the idea is, okay, we have polycentric metropolitan areas. So the previous analysis was for all European cities. Now we focus on polycentric metropolitan areas, and the defining feature of polycentric metropolitan areas is that the cities are more or less of a similar size. So in the Netherlands we have lots of those areas. I'll give a list later. And these simple ideas, if they are less loosely connected and more strongly integrated, they will perform better. And in my view, it's a matter of not just functional integration, but also a kind of cultural integration and institutional integration. In the Netherlands, I refer to this as metropoolvorming. So the idea that there's a kind of upward spiral of integration that makes polycentric metropolitan areas, such as the Randstad, perform better. Yeah, that's basically, I think that's a very fair hypothesis, right? You would think it's right, but we explored it. So we measured. Okay, first we identified polycentric metropolitan areas. Then we measured how they perform. Then we had a couple of measures for all these over 100 polycentric metropolitan areas in Europe that tell how strongly integrated they are, and then we linked that back to the performance of the whole ecosystem. So we had a certain method to identify polycentric metropolitan areas in Europe. Actually, it was the first time someone did try to define them all in Europe. Actually, the ones that came out as the most polycentric, pick your favorite. In fact, all European countries contain a number of such areas. What was for me was reassuring was that all the usual suspects came out as being a polycentric metropolitan area. So in red are the Dutch ones, or in blue, sorry. No, it shouldn't be.
Both colors.
Yeah, I forgot what the difference was. But the Urbanism, for instance, okay, then we had this performance measure. How do they perform? So in general, Dutch polycentric metropolitan areas perform pretty well. Imagine there are 111 regions, and they all are in the upper ranks. In terms of corporate functions, they perform better. Scientifically, they perform better. Sports and culture. Culture a bit less, actually. So we try to explain this by the level to which they are integrated. We had several measures for functional integration. Not going into detail here. This is how they scored. Institutional integration. Actually, we wanted to know how well they cooperate together, but that was really hard to get a measure of. So this is more kind of whether they are institutionally fragmented or not. So as the Euro-regio MEAHL, so that's Maastricht, Aachen, Heerlen, Liège in Belgium, came out as the most institutionally fragmented. Yeah, that seems fair. And the Polish one, the Tri-City in Poland, came out as most integrated. So for cultural integration, we had some measures like the political color of the mayors. Are they the same or not? We think that reflects whether the cities are more or less similar. For instance, in the Ruhr area, all the cities have more or less the same political color. So that's for us a sign of culturally homogeneous region. Well, we also looked at language. I don't know why this is in Russian, but I couldn't find the original map in English anymore. So, if polycentric metropolitan areas is spread over different language areas, for instance, like in Belgium, the central Belgium area, you should say nowadays, the Flemish diamond in the past. That's of course a very culturally fragmented area. In fact, now the big question, of course, does it influence performance of such regions? You see a very positive relation between the level of functional integration and performance. So again, another indication that networks integration between cities is important for performance. For the institutional integration, we did not find any relationship for the detail. So I could have made this into a big press release saying that it doesn't make sense to merge provinces, for instance, but in the end we decided not to do that. Because there are more dimensions involved than just
And you got your money
measured,
from the government. And you got your money from the government.
Also, yeah. But actually that was not an issue. Actually they probably would have pressed for that press release. Cultural integration didn't matter either. So there were some relationships between the cultural, institutional, functional dimension. But in the end, the hypothesis more or less was wrong. It's more about functional integration. The other dimensions don't play such a big role. Let's return to what I thought was one of the biggest planning. Of course, I like to make things that I'm working on bigger than they probably are. So. But anyway, the biggest planning debate in the Netherlands should be foster concentration of urban development in one city, or maybe two. Or should we do the alternative, border size, blah blah blah, networks of cities story. So there are some. I think we can, based on this, we can identify some pros and cons of the further concentration of urban development in one city. Read Amsterdam, right? That's what they want. So, of course, a pro of that approach is that bigger cities have more agglomeration economies, but that's a kind of static perspective. There are no studies that show that cities that grow in population also get more agglomeration economies, right? So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. That's for economists to solve. And also the connection between city size and growth seems not so evident in this part of Europe anymore. Recently there was an SPS study that showed that second-tier cities actually are performing much better than the big capital city regions. Also, the contribution of smaller cities to GDP is growing at the expense of the contribution of larger cities. So in Western Europe, contrary to I think Eastern Europe, the big cities are not the main drivers of growth, I would say. Okay, as we found, networks seem to become increasingly important, even though the static dimension, we think they become more important. They are important, that's what we know. Sometimes they are more important than size, so that's not something you should necessarily try to foster population growth. And larger cities, that's a pro of concentration, are better able to capitalize on the network position, right? That's also what we found. But we would lose a unique selling point, I think, of the Dutch urban system, that it's so polycentric and that leads to a better balance between agglomeration, benefits and costs. Not something we found here, but something we established previously. So my solution would be, of course, there's a big demand for living in Amsterdam, living in other cities like Utrecht, even Delft is growing, The Hague is growing quite fast. So, of course, we should accommodate that. But at the same time, we should think about the international network position, try to make sure that the firms, that the people in these cities are part of international networks. How that really works, that's a bit vague and not so easy to tell to local governments, but that it works that way is something we found. And of course, we need to stimulate integration between neighbouring cities. That's it.